Great to see you, Mike. How have you been doing, mate?
I've been doing fine, really, off and on. I mean, I've had ups and downs, you know. I finally got, um, I finally got these. Hang on a minute, and um, these turned up
Oh
at long
yeah,
last.
yeah,
The
fantastic.
the multiverse books, and they're really good. I really like them. I love the color. It's been just superb. So,
Thanks
um,
so much, mate. I'm very pleased that you were pleased. Could you just open some of those interior pages on
oh
camera?
sure,
Because
yeah,
I don't
yeah,
have any to
yeah.
hand.
Okay, yeah. Well, I don't know really. Here's one.
Oh yeah, that's it. Just oh yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I
I'm
mean,
so
that's.
glad you like that colouring because we worked very hard to get that aspect to
Did
it.
you?
Yeah,
Yeah. I mean, I'm glad you. I mean, it's well worth it because I think it's so much better than the glossy, you know, coloring, the like gravure coloring that
yeah,
you tend to get. Um, I don't know much about processes these days,
yeah.
but they're really. I mean, I can't really see that very well, but I can't see above my own book. But and also I got this, which came in the same parcels.
Oh, great. Yeah,
The
reports from the
Ballard book.
deep end. Well,
Yeah,
I'm
yeah,
glad you've got both of those because we're gonna talk about they're both handsome packages. We've
yeah,
talked about the multiverse before, on the run up to publication.
yeah.
But having seen the books myself, I'm so glad that you're pleased with them because all the careful work that our comics team and that Jackie Fluke, our production manager, did, and Kevin, our production process manager, they just did a great job with it. And when they came and hit our desk the other week, just before we sent them to you, I was like, I'm a big fan of the original, as you are yourself, but I actually think this is the best looking package that material has
I
ever
do
had.
too. Yeah, and also it's got all the original captions and titles in it, which the DC one, which you know, I'm not knocking the DC one, but it didn't. It left those out because
Yeah,
it somehow thought that they weren't part of it, whereas of course they were part of it because they're, you know, coming next week or next month actually wasn't coming next month, and there was some point to that. Um, so, you know, you can look in these books and find a dozen things to mystify you. Um, I also just in passing, because you've got him in the Ballard book as well, I got this in the same post, which
oh, wonderful.
it's is this backwards or
No,
can you?
you
No,
can see
you can
it.
see it all
Yeah,
right. Yeah,
Iain Sinclair, you
it's
can see it straight up. Yeah.
yeah, it's in Sinclair's latest book, Pariah Genius, which is bloody good, I must say. And as is the story in the Ballard collection. So I've had a
Well,
lot of very nice books arrive this week. So thanks a
I'm very
lot.
pleased. I'm pleased you like the Sinclair as well. That's great news.
Yeah, yeah. But I like the production of the Ballard book too. Again, that's a nicely produced book. I mean, I'm frankly surprised because the production of books has been going down rather than up
Yeah.
in general. You know, paper quality and all the rest of it hasn't been that great. I don't mean yours, but you
Yes.
know, in general, in publishing. So, you know, it's very nice to get books that look like books should look like,
Oh,
and that you know you pleased to own, as it were.
well, Mike, I'm so very pleased to hear that, and our books team and Rick and Johnny run our comics team, and especially Jackie and her team who do the production, and Kevin who arranges the printing. They will absolutely be very pleased to hear that feedback, and I'm going to pass it along. That's great.
Oh, that's great. Well, you know, unsolicited testimonial, no question of that.
The best kind, the best kind.
Yes, yeah,
I'm kind of one of my next steps with the multiverse that I really want to do, and we've been talking about this, you and I, for a while, is that I want to get hold of Walter and get him to join us on a future episode. And I'm about 2 weeks away from going to San Diego for our kind of annual company pilgrimage
yeah,
there. And Walter is he's usually there. So I'm really going to try hard to doorstep him, because I know he's been doing some stuff which has absorbed his time. But
well, he's been moving mostly, yeah.
Right on, yeah, exactly. And I want to doorstep him about the fact that I want to get him on here so you guys can just have a conversation,
Yeah.
you know, the two of you with me watching on, if you will, about the creation of the book.
Yeah, I was on another video a couple of weeks or so ago. I can't remember when it was, and they had the impression that Walter and I were at odds. That
How strange.
we quarrelled in some way or other, and as I said to them, you know, I was able to put that one to rest pretty quickly.
Yeah.
I said, no, you know, we're good friends. You know, we've got on pretty much ever since. Well, I mean, I met him in whatever it was, 1976 or 7, I think.
Yeah.
It was the first time I met him. Not that we became friends then, but I was a friend of Howard Chaykin. So, you know,
yeah.
I just went along to the studio that they were in, the Upstart that they had then. Yeah.
Yeah. Anyway. I didn't realize that you were a mate of Chaykin's as well.
Yeah.
I've met him a few times over the year, and he's such an interesting and smart guy. You know, very he never says anything dull, in my opinion. You know, Chaykin's always got an interesting take on stuff.
Yeah, I agree with you completely. I've been out of touch with him lately, not for any particular reason, but just because, you know, our paths haven't crossed, you know, the way these things happen.
Yeah.
But I saw that he and Walter and Wheezy were all at the same convention, a comics convention. I can't remember where it was, but this was only a couple of weeks ago. So it means he must be back in circulation.
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, they've been quite active on the circuit quite recently, all of those guys.
Yeah. So it'd be nice. I mean, you know, at some point too, you could see if Howie wants to come on as well. You know?
Do you know what? I'm sure he will. I'm saying this. I'm sure he will. But I'll reach out to him. So yeah, I've got a good friend of mine who you will know, Bob Wayne, the former head of sales and marketing at DC, did that role for years. He's good pals with Chaykin, and which is how I've met Howard a few times. But I'll reach out via him because I'm it would be great to get Howard on as well in a different slot, and you know, you guys could just take the conversation and go. That would be awesome. Actually, for those to whom Bob Wayne is a meaningful thing, I've got a cool thing coming up at this year's San Diego. As usual, I'm like hosting a bunch of panels for a variety of, generally it's, you know, books and comics that we publish at Titan, whether it's Titan Books, whether it's Titan Comics. But one of the additional things I'm doing is I'm doing a panel with Bob Wayne about his essentially his 60 years in the comics business, and his years at DC. And his years at DC are fascinating because it's not only the era that birthed Moorcock's Multiverse, but all that British invasion stuff as it came to be known, you know, the Alan Moore stuff and what have you. And Bob was there at the epicenter of selling all that stuff, right in the thick of it. So, you know, he's got a bunch of fascinating stories.
Yeah, I'm not sure well, I mean, Bob's a different matter. I don't think every American guy in comics was happy with the Alan Moore invasion, which took the whole sort of emphasis away from what they were used to what you know, he was doing. So but now he's not doing comics anymore. Maybe they're happy with that. I don't know.
Well, you know, with the passage of time, I think they're very, you know, well prepared to take the prestige and the sales. And once you have those things together, that tends to dilute most enmity. You know what I mean?
Yes, absolutely. Yeah.
Sorry, carry on, mate.
No, you go on. Yeah.
I was going to say, and the thing about Bob is Bob's a real Anglophile, a huge Anglophile. So I think he was genetically wired to welcome the arrival of Alan and Dave Gibbons and all those great talents. I think he was very much a kind of standard bearer for it. Before we get into talking books, you know, are you're coming at me for, you're back in Paris at the moment, right, Mike?
I am indeed. This is Paris behind me. A different background.
And how are you finding it this time around?
Well, I mean, I'm not too happy with the elections, as you can imagine.
Of course.
Over here we're pretty unhappy. Over there, of course, everybody's sort of dancing in the streets.
Well, I mean, after 14 long years or whatever it's been, now
yeah, 14 years of Tory misrule. I think it was 13 years of Tory misrule, which was the last. I think it was the Harold Wilson slogan.
Yes,
yeah,
absolutely.
This is 14 years of Tory misrule. An extra year of misrule can't do anybody any good. Yeah, I mean, I like Starmer, and I think that he's probably going to show himself to be pretty surprising. People see him as being bland and not very well. Yeah, I don't know what the word is.
He's not a showman like some of these other fucking clowns are. But I mean, my view would be, I'm very happy to have somebody who's kind of, relatively academic and, relatively boring. And if he's applied to the job of being the premier, if they are applied to the job of governance, I'll take that over the dog and pony show we've been in the thick of for the last
absolutely
any day of the week, mate.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So fingers crossed. Let's hope they can influence what goes on in France at the moment, or indeed what's going on in America at the moment, both of which are not particularly.
No, I mean, it's highly unsavory. Very worrying.
Yes. Yeah.
There can be no doubt, mate. Can we arc into talking a bit about, because you were praising that collection, which is really quite an interesting thing, the Ballard Universe collection, if you will, Reports from the Deep End. Could you, before you talk about your involvement in that book, could you talk about something we've touched upon, I think, on our podcast, but not here on Forbidden Planet TV, which was your relationship with Ballard himself?
Oh, well, I mean, we were just old friends. So every so often we fell out. I mean, there's no question of that. And people have shown me letters where he's grumpily saying, New Worlds is a pile of crap, and Moorcock's. Well, he doesn't actually go after me that much, but he does a bit. And it's and I don't really take it very seriously, because it was a very weird relationship, because I began promoting him. I started first issue of New Worlds. I did. He and William Burroughs were the two authors I really pushed. Although he didn't need a lot of pushing in New Worlds, of course, by that time, but nonetheless, and whenever I had the chance, I'd do a bit on Ballard. I remember I was editing a girly magazine for about 3 or 4 issues for the Gold Brothers, who were publishing New Worlds, and they'd asked me to put the text in, between the rather, there are things that really wouldn't much upset your maiden aunt. In fact, most of the ladies look rather like your maiden aunt. So whenever I had the chance in the text, I'd put a bit on Ballard in it. I did one page that was just a big picture of Ballard, and it was a sort of push and everything. But Claire, his longtime girlfriend, whom I introduced him. I mean, I thought at the time that Claire was, was the girl for him, as it were. She said that he was jealous of me, that these sort of episodes were to do with jealousy, and I couldn't see any reason why he would be jealous of me. I mean, I could see a reason I could be jealous of him, as it were. But anyway, so it was a very odd relationship off and on, and I was, for instance, there are people who are now telling sort of stories about me and Jimmy, or at least one in particular, which were not particularly pleasant, as if we actually had sort of been at odds, as it were, which we weren't. I mean, we were just. I did have reasons to be upset with him on occasions, and it was usually his treatment of other people, as it were, you know. And I didn't like some of the things, you know, that there were just things that I just had to tell him, you know, I didn't like, and that would, I know that if I did that, then he wouldn't speak to me for, you know, for 6 months. But I'd have to do it, because otherwise I wouldn't feel that I was, you know, being, you know, right to myself, as it were. Because he was a very complicated man, but he was also very, you know, he was a before Mary died, he was a lot more relaxed and easy. And then Mary did die, and he tended to use me and my ex-wife, now dead, Hilary, as a sort of crutch. I think, you know, he'd bring the kids round, and he'd sort of come and see us quite a bit, and so during that period we were very close. He could be incredibly funny and very sharp, you know. And I also, the other person I introduced him to was a bloke called Eduardo Paolozzi, and who was the artist. I mean, the sculptor and what do you call him, silk screen guy. And Paolozzi had a similar way of doing monologues. I mean, Jimmy, you couldn't stop, you know, and it was often familiar. You'd heard it before more than once, and he would, because he was essentially rehearsing all the time his thoughts and his ideas. I mean, that's if he was not, if he, well, you know, he'd get into that mood where he was just giving you this spiel basically, and Paolozzi was the same. But the difference between Jimmy and Paolozzi was that Paolozzi had no sense of humor at all. And I remember once a friend of mine, Mike Dempsey, who's now sadly dead, but he was fairly well known at the time. He knew Paolozzi as well. And we once went round to see Paolozzi, but before we went to see him, we had a bet that if we started a conversation between ourselves that had absolutely nothing to do with Paolozzi or what he was saying, that he wouldn't notice. And so this happened. We started the conversation. He didn't notice. I mean, he just went on with his monologue, and then wondered why we were rolling about on the floor, because we'd had this bet. And Jimmy wasn't really like that. He's far more complex, interesting, and funny than that. I really was extremely fond of him. And after Mary died, I mean, you know, when Mary died, we got a telegram, which I still remember. I still remember getting the telegram, which said something like, Mary died today, great heart, back on Thursday or whatever it was, love, Jimmy. And that was really the turning point, for him as an individual. There's no doubt about that.
Yeah.
I was helping Chris Priest. Chris Priest was doing a book on Jimmy. He wrote a lot of hack books when he was starting, which a lot of people did and have done. You know, Balzac did a bunch of them under the name of Lord Byron, I think. So, you know, it's nothing that anybody ever blames anybody for doing. It's a way of, you know, it's your day job, as it were, for, you know, for when you're trying to do better than that. And but Chris had done this whole bunch of Hell's Angels books for NEL, and he came round to me one day and told me that he wanted a word with me. You know, and I said fine. You know, at that time I was not upset with him or anything. And then he proposed to tell me that I should write my fantasy books under a pseudonym, and that it was not doing me any good to write, you know, my the Hawkmoon books or the Elric books, you know, so on, and it's against my nature to do that. I just to me, that's lying. I know it sounds strange. I mean, because there are a lot of writers, perfectly good writers, who've done it one way or another. Ian Watson, no, not Ian Watson, Ian Banks.
Yes, of course.
I mean, although it was a pretty obvious one.
But, I mean, it's not the most hard to interpret pseudonym.
No. But a lot of writers do it to separate one kind of writing from another, which is fair enough. But I didn't, I've always believed. Well, there's two things. One is my name gives rise to schoolboy jokes,
of course,
which I could have changed it very early on, on knowing that. But I refused to, and all of the Moorcocks in my family who stuck by their name, and there aren't many of them. I can tell you, my mother never used her married name if she could avoid it. But we're a fairly obstinate bunch. We stick to that name, and I just didn't like it. I didn't like the whole tenor of what he was saying. So that was really the thing that offended me. I mean, but it wasn't anything. I just didn't like him very much.
The thing is, when you're a journalist, as I used to be, as you know, and you're in the business of sharing opinions about people that that people might share with you, they may not. But the subject of those opinions, it's one thing when you're writing about them as fundamentally a journalist and outsider.
Yeah.
When it's a fellow professional, somebody with the status that's on a par with your own, your words carry much more weight, and people are far more concerned about what you're saying. And I think you have to, it's the old Spider-Man deal, right? With great power comes great responsibility. You've got to be very careful, thanks Stan, about where you how you bowl that out. And it's just a completely different vibe. If you're trashing a peer of yours, it's not really a very good look, even if it's legitimate stuff.
Well, and even and also the reader doesn't pay any bloody attention to it, basically. But I think, but certain people do, and I know they did in John Brunner's case. I mean, when John was near the end of his life, which was pretty sad. I mean, he'd become rather wretched in some ways. His books weren't selling. He wasn't, he was living in the country away from a lot of people that that would otherwise have helped shore him up, as it were, because he was very kind to other people and other young writers. He'd start them off, he'd give them tips, he'd do all sorts of stuff. And although it was very easy to make a joke about him, it wasn't right to do it to. It was, again, the bit of gossip in the pub is one thing. The talking, the thing that might affect somebody's professional career is another thing, and they just shouldn't be. Well, they just shouldn't be mixed up. So anyway, enough of that. I've probably trashed half the people I know.
I think you're very measured, Mike. Let's use that extended conversation as a jumping point into your experience with Reports from the Deep End, and how did you come to be involved? Who was it who recruited you?
Oh well, I've known Maxim since he was in Nappies. I mean, he's been a very good friend to me over the years. I knew him in France as well
and this is Maxim Jakubowski, by the way.
Yes. The editor, really the chief editor, I think, of the book.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't know the other guy, but
he's Rick McGrath, I think, is the other chap.
I mean, I think I met him once, but I don't think I know him. But I know Maxim very well, and I've known him pretty much every life that is led. From being a struggling young translator, come writer, to a very successful bookstore owner, and
Murder One, of course, on Charing Cross Road.
Yeah,
so I was a regular customer.
Yeah, and all of his, anthologies and series, and he worked for Virgin. And usually at one point or another, when he's been working in publishing, he's asked me for something, could you do us a story on this? I did a newspaper called The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, which is the Sex Pistols. Well, yes. That was when Maxim was working at Virgin. And I wouldn't have written that if Maxim hadn't been the editor. I can't remember, I think it called something like Zebra Books, something like that. It began with a Z anyway. And I wrote quite a bit for him. Well, not quite a bit, but I wrote, he was there. The firm didn't last for very long. But while it was going, he did some really, really good stuff. And one of them was a series of political pamphlets, basically political pamphlets, which one of which he tricked me into writing, really, by saying so-and-so is doing this book, and I'm saying, what? He's doing what? And Max says, yeah, he's doing this book. Because I was saying, no, I don't think so, Maxie. My political ideas aren't very interesting, this and that, and he finally got me to write this. It was basically an anti-Thatcher book.
Yeah.
In the 80s. And
quite right too. Quite right too.
Yeah.
Quite right too. The only kind of Thatcher book is an anti-Thatcher book.
Well, quite. Well, I wasn't going to write a pro one, that's for sure.
There we go.
Anyway, so I did that, and that was that Virgin series, that particular Virgin series. And then when they wanted something to go out with the Sex Pistols movie, The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, he got me to write that, and I wrote it. Virgin was just across the road from me in those days. So we were both in Notting Hill, well, Nottingdale really, and so he would give me the how paranoid people are about the video getting out before the movie gets released and all
Absolutely.
of that.
Yeah.
So it was virtually chained to me a messenger would come round with the video that day. I'm pretty sure this is how it ran. And I would write a chapter. And I would send the chapter and the video back by another messenger that came to take it away again. And I wrote it, I think, in 10 days, a day at a time, 10 chapters. And really the reason I wrote it was, I hated Malcolm McLaren, and I really wanted to speak up for the Pistols, who I liked.
Yeah.
And I also, hang on a minute, what was the other reason? Oh yeah, that's right. I'd always wanted to see Irene Handl as Mrs. Cornelius, as Jerry's mother.
Brilliant, perfect.
She would have been great. So, and I knew Irene Handl slightly. She used to go into a bookshop that John Aglin ran with Stan, just up in Westbourne Park Road. She lived just around there, and she was a great science fiction reader. And she'd come in and say, "Got any more science fiction, darling?" And she was a very well read, and really her accent was more Edwardian than it was Cockney.
Yeah.
So she'd move it towards Cockney when she was doing her Cockney stuff. So I wanted her in. So since she was in The Great Rock and Roll Swindle, I had her in my version of The Great Rock and Roll Swindle as Mrs. Cornelius. So I did that for Maxim, and he published that. When I was doing the New Worlds, New Worlds, with a Jerry Cornelius anthology, I asked him for a story, and so he gave me. In fact, I had 2 stories from Maxim, Jerry Cornelius stories, and they're in various anthologies, Jerry Cornelius anthologies, so when this book came up, cut a long story short, or kind of rambling story short, Maxim, just asked me for a story. He also knew that Jimmy and I had been, good good friends. And he slightly he remembers this slightly differently, but he remembers that Jimmy had asked him to get him the William Burroughs books when they were first unavailable in England, but you could get them here in Olympia editions. Now, what I remember is actually smuggling them over from here to Jimmy, but I might have asked Maxim as well. I can't remember exactly what the story was. So we were all kind of mixed up in those very early days. I mean, actually pre-New Worlds days, well pre-New Worlds, so it's just been a very long friendship, and I've always been very fond of Maxim. So nothing nasty to say about Maxim.
No, very good. I've only known him in recent years, but no, that's not true. I've only interacted with him personally in recent years, but I've known him for a very long time, and the reason for that is with him running Murder One, the crime bookstore on Charing Cross Road for as long as he did. All through my Loaded magazine years and my NME years and my Uncut years, I've always been a voracious crime reader of private eye novels. That's one of my big sort of pleasures, right? Yeah. And so I used to go and get my Mike Hammer novels from Murder One and my Robert B. Parker Spencer novels and all that. And he certainly used to sell me the Mike Hammers with quite a degree of disdain. Yeah. Yes. And he'd be sat at his he had this raised plinth type desk where he'd be writing, and then he'd serve you when he came up. And I remember once he sold me a complete guide to Ed McBain's 87th Precinct novels, which are wonderful in themselves, I think. But he sent me a complete guide. It's called The Boys from Grover Avenue, and it was a complete piece of salesmanship. I was getting the latest 87th Precinct. There's a full guide over there, and it was a classic piece of upselling. But his rolling eyes about the Hammer novels has always amused me, because I've always loved Spillane, I've always loved Hammer, and of course now I edit the Hammer books as written, as continued by Max Allen Collins, who's a good mate of mine. Yeah, and so it's funny. So I always associate Maxim at his typing desk, magisterially serving me these trash novels. Right. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I can't talk because I wrote a Hank Jansen story that I rewrote with a different name in it, which has been being published ever since. Yeah. So I and I also wrote, I wrote for the Gold Brothers, who were the Hank Jansen publishers. But I remember a story a friend of mine told me. He was a friend of Mike, what's his name? The guy who wrote the Mike Hammer books.
Oh, Mickey Spillane. Yeah.
Mickey Spillane. Yeah. And he used to drink in the same bar as Mickey. He was a very short guy, apparently. I mean, I don't know.
Yeah, he was. Yeah, true.
And my friend Ed, he said whenever Mickey would come into the bar, he'd come into the bar very tough. The barman would reach across, because this was in New York anyway, where they weren't, they were banned, and reach across the bar, take Mickey's gun out of its holster, because he always carried this holster, put it behind the bar and say, "You can have it when you go home." and he'd just take it, and it somehow didn't quite fit, with the. Well, Mike Hammer wouldn't have allowed that. Let's put it that way.
Mike certainly wouldn't have allowed that.
One of my favourite films is a Mike Hammer film, which is I think, what is it? It's not Kiss Me Deadly.
It's got to be. Is it
Kiss Me Deadly?
Kiss Me Deadly with Ralph Meeker.
Yes,
directed by Robert Aldrich. It is a masterpiece. Absolutely. That film.
It is a masterpiece. I had it on. I was at a film festival in in Switzerland a few years ago, and I had to pick, where they did your own favourite films. None of which I think went down particularly well with the audience. But Kiss Me Deadly was one of those films, which I've always found superb. I mean, I just think it's one of it uses the language of film absolutely perfectly. I mean,
I could not agree more. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean,
it's Aldrich at the height of his powers as a youngish man, but just the decisions he makes and the ass backwards nature of the film is just so brilliantly done. Right
yeah,
from the back to front titles as he's driving
yes,
through the wilds of California. It's
yeah,
just, but
yeah,
Ralph Meeker's performance in that film, Meeker was a great actor, but he was
yeah.
never given the opportunity to be a
Well,
leading man in that way ever again. And he
no, well,
virtually
he died,
shouts his
didn't
way
he?
through the film.
Yeah,
He died quite
I
young.
think he died early,
Yeah.
early. Yeah, yeah.
But
No,
man, he's wonderful in it.
everything about it. I mean,
Yes.
every actor is brought out
Yeah.
to their best, I think. Yeah, I mean, I'm not a great, film buff in the sense that I don't know a lot about directors or, or I don't follow films in that way, the way everybody over here does. I mean,
Yeah.
I'm really illiterate as far as films are concerned, particularly in France. But that one is to me just has everything in it that a good film of any kind should have in it. And yeah, anyway,
Mike,
yeah,
I couldn't agree more. Funnily enough, where you are now, in the year that I spent as the MD of or Director General, as I would have said, of Kaedu Cinema, I that's not a period of my professional life that I particularly enjoyed. I was away from my kids on too much of a regular basis and all that kind of stuff. But the one shining memory for me of the year I spent living in Paris on Rue de Faubourg Saint-Antoine would be when they did when Kai threw a special screening of Kiss Me Deadly. And I remember almost every element of that evening. And they showed it with subtitles, so it's super easy to watch.
yeah,
And the French the French love that movie. And quite rightly so, as does
yeah,
everybody else. But man, that was a fantastic evening. I will
yeah.
never forget it.
I should have done it in a French. Well, probably everybody would be so blasé about it. They'd say,
Yeah.
"Oh no, not that again."
Yeah.
I mean,
Right
I think one of the other films I wanted shown was John Carter, which I like and everybody else hates.
And you know what? I can tell you two other people like it, myself and my son. We both loved John
Oh,
Carter.
good. Oh,
Yeah,
good.
we loved it.
Well,
And of
Linda
course,
and I loved
he
it
didn't know
too.
anything about it. And he
Yeah.
went in and as a teenager and just thought it was fantastic.
Absolutely, Linda was the same. I mean, she hates most science fiction films, anything like that. But she thought it was great. I the story I've got about that is that my daughter completely nothing to do with me at all, but she had read The Princess of Mars when she was a little girl and loved it. She didn't become a Burroughs fan or anything, but that was she loved it. So I said to her, if you like this film, if you like the book, you'll I'm sure you'll love the film. So why don't you take yourself and the two my two grandchildren it was only showing at the Leicester Square cinema, so there wasn't anywhere I could she could see it. Take them there to see it. I'm sure you'll love it. If you don't like it, then I'll give you your money back. And it cost me a fortune. They all hated it.
I was really expecting that story to go somewhere else.
But we it's one of the few that Linda and I got on Blu-ray just so we could watch it, over and over.
It is totally fucking underrated.
Yes, it is.
I tell you another one of those like pulp related movies, which I think is highly underrated and reaps dividends if you watch it. It's perhaps not on the same level as John Carter, but I have very much enjoyed it and watched it multiple times, as have my kids when they're growing up, is the movie of The Phantom starring Billy Zane. That is that is very faithful to The Phantom, remarkably faithful.
Oh, I've never seen it. I'm not a great Phantom fan, so I probably wouldn't have sort of gone out to see it, as it were.
Me neither, but there's something, although there was a great cartoon show based on The Phantom, which they made, oh man, about 30 years ago, I guess, because I remember watching it while my kid's mum was pregnant with my son, My partner at the time was pregnant with my son, and we used to watch it every week. It's called Phantom 2040. It's very unusually designed, and it basically moves the Phantom mythos to the future. But it's got a great voice cast. Mark Hamill's in that voice cast, who's turned out to be a great voice actor. And Margot Kidder played the female villain of the piece, but it's weirdly designed by this designer called Peter Chung, who created a show called Aeon Flux, and all the characters are weirdly elongated. But that Phantom 2040 and the movie, which is directed by Simon Windsor, if I remember correctly, but stars Billy Zane, and it's worth seeking out.
Yeah, well, I will. I certainly will. I'm always looking. We pretty much ran out of films to watch here because, you know, we actually watched the first episode of the new French Three Musketeers.
Oh, that is, I thought that was fantastic, by the way.
Absolutely.
I watched that.
We didn't know, though, that it was in two parts. So we're sitting watching it, and suddenly, bingo, you know, the next one you have to pay for.
Yeah. Well, I was watching, I was looking at watch thinking, God, I don't have a lot of time to wind this up. And then it was like, oh, okay, it's half the story.
And I said to Linda, is this a series? Or, you know, and she said, don't think so, and turned out to be a series of two. But I think it's actually on now, so we'll be able to watch the second one and all the way through, because we only just happened to come across it when it was about halfway through the first. But I thought that was superb.
I also thought it was superb.
Yeah.
And I love the fact that for all its greatness, what it also was is a French adaptation of the Three Musketeers, because there's numerous other versions I really loved. I really loved the two Richard Lester movies. I love those. They're great. And I will rewatch the first one again recently and just loved it. And then also the Gene Kelly version is fantastic, super enjoyable. But they're all Hollywood takes on the mythos.
Exactly. I've seen, and my kids saw it too and liked it, because I think I've told this, but my kids didn't know that films came in color and sound until they were about 15, because I'd take them to all these old black and white Douglas Fairbanks films, you know, and so
Mask of Zorro and what have you.
Yeah. And they did a Three Musketeers, and also I think they did a 20 years after as well.
Yeah.
And I took them to watch it at a special showing at what was then the classic Notting Hill, with and Douglas Fairbanks Jr. was at the performance, and there was a film of his as well, which is very good. I mean, I'm sorry he didn't stay in those.
He did a great version of Sinbad, didn't he? Yeah,
yes, he did.
Yeah,
yes, I mean, he
good.
could do all his dad's tricks, which maybe he just got tired of doing. But anyway, so he was at this thing, and my daughter Sophie ran after him with a book about the Fairbanks family to get him to sign. And as I said at the time, you know, this must be the first time in about 40 years that he's had a teenage girl run after him to get a book signed. Unfortunately, it's signed upside down because he signed it sort of through the window of his car, and she gave him the wrong end up. So it's a signed copy, but it's signed. You have to look for the signature. Anyway,
that surely only makes it a rarer piece of signed and endorsed printed material.
Yeah, absolutely, I suppose so. But I'll tell you, we even liked. Both Linda and I are great Three Musketeers fans, and we even liked the one with the airships in it.
Oh, that's great. Do you know what? Who's that director? What's his name? I thought that was great. I thought that was a lot of fun.
Yeah,
and that was in the year that came out. That was Tarantino for years has done this thing where he's done his favorite 10 films of the year, right? And it's quite an eclectic list, right? And as it is, you'd expect with him, it's never quite what you expect. But in the year that came out, that was like in his top 2 or 3 films of the things he enjoyed the most that year.
Good.
Is that steampunk version of the Three Musketeers?
Yeah.
I enjoyed that too.
I was like a good airship story anyway, but that was I thought they were particularly good airships. Cannon fire. Well, probably that's partly why I like John Carter as well. That's probably where I got it all from in the first place.
Right on. Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
The link is there throughout all of it, isn't it? After this segue into movies, which I'm very happy to carry on talking about, by the way, mate, as ever. Just to flip back to your story inside the Ballard collection, what's the premise of your tale?
Oh, I don't know really. It's a Jerry Cornelius story, so it's a lot of things. It's it touches on our relationship. It touches on my, I suppose, on the drowned world, which I suppose after Voices of Time was the story which first made me think he was more than just a top-class science fiction writer. I mean, he was something more than that. And then the Drowned World, I think, came out just after Voices of Time, or around whenever it was. But those two stories made me see him in a very different. I mean, I'd seen the stuff that he was doing at home, because he'd had a lot of cutouts and big blow-ups of stuff that, in fact, I reprinted it in New Worlds years later, because we could only have reprinted it in the big New Worlds. But they were just the same sort of things that I do. I've been doing. I always do collages and stuff like that when I'm thinking through a story. I've got some good news, by the way. You mustn't let me forget, because I'm celebrating today.
I won't. I'll come back to that.
I keep forgetting that I'm celebrating. But anyway, I've lost my thread, of course.
It's about your Jerry Cornelius story.
Oh yeah. Well, and really, it's just it just riffs off a number of. There's a little bit of Ballard parody in it, of his style, or what I've always thought of as his typical, really not even pre Drowned World style. He was doing it afterwards as well. It wasn't really until Crash that he started to write books that weren't essentially a form of very good generic science fiction. I suppose it was Crash. I'm not entirely sure of the dates, so and I think after he sort of went through a period really doing Crash and Concrete Island and High Rise, that group. He then went back to doing essentially a form of high-end generic science fiction. At least most stuff I saw. To be honest, I wasn't reading it all, but that was fair enough, because he never read anything of mine either. So I mean, we probably what kept us good friends. But it was it was that's what it is. I mean, it's a lot of different things. I think the story I like best, apart from mine in it, is the Iain Sinclair, but I probably would, because I really think Sinclair's the best writer of English prose at the moment that there is around. So I tend to be apart from being good friends, and wanting to pass the news on to as many people who listen. But I haven't read every one of the stories yet, because it only just recently arrived. But so far, I think it's a pretty good anthology. Jimmy used to say, when he was editing the prose editor for Ambit, he used to say that the only stories he wanted to publish were stories that were exactly like his own. And this was during his brief period of being editor of Science Fantasy, which I think it was still called Science Fantasy then. Bonfilioli left, but Keith Roberts was essentially the real editor of Science Fantasy. Bonfiglioli was a nice guy, but a drunk and a wastrel, and he whenever press day came, he'd be wandering through the piles of unread manuscripts, going, "Oh fuck, oh fuck," and Keith would have to come along and sort out, go through them, sort out the best of them and pull out what he could out of the pile, and put it together, so that when Bonfiglioni left, Keith didn't want to take the responsibility of having his name on it for some reason, because he'd been the editor really all along. So I suggested, like an idiot really, that Jimmy become the editor of Science Fantasy, which lasted really one full day, in which you got two relatively paranoid people, Jimmy and Keith Roberts. Keith was neither of them would speak, so they just nurse their and fume. So here I am in the middle of this. This is at my house, and I'm trying to get them together to discuss how they're going to put an issue together and get the whole thing rolling. And Jimmy finally starts to say to me, "Tell him that I think that and they're both in the same room. Tell him that I think that his ideas for covers are crap, and we want some real Max Ernst and all this, his usual stuff." And this was the paperback issue, which wasn't really suitable for a lot of his ideas. And then Keith would say to me, "Could you tell Mr. Ballard that I've done quite a few, surrealist type covers, and so I'm in the middle of this, and I'm refusing to do it. I won't play the game, but they won't let me do it any other way. I mean, there's no other. And I'm saying, come on, we can do it. Come on, but it didn't. And so in the end, I forget which one of them stormed off first. I mean, they'd both driven up to London, so it was. I forget which one it was, but one or the other stormed off, and that was the end of Jimmy's. He phoned me the same day, I think, to say, I can't work with this man, and this man being Keith, who was really the been doing all the work anyway, said, "I'm afraid, Mike, that I don't think Mr. Ballard and I are going to get on very well." so anyway, I don't know where that came from. Again, I've lost my thread. Up to you, Andy.
But it's a glorious anecdote. I remember something about Ballard, who I never met and never interviewed. But back when I was writing for the NME, one of my colleagues did interview him. Now I suspect it was around the time that the movie version of Crash came out, I would imagine.
It could have been, but he was pretty popular with on NME. He and Harlan Ellison and me were sort of quite
undoubtedly
much read by that bunch,
by that crowd, and
also by the musicians as well. I mean, anyway, you were saying.
But the interesting thing, I mean, that's undoubtedly true. But the interesting thing was, my colleague came back quite surprised. He said, "Do you know what? J.G. Ballard doesn't listen to music." And I was like, "What?" He goes, "He never listens to music. He doesn't have it in the house." And because he had such a kind of like pro, musician persona, as you say.
Well, he was rock and roll.
Musicians. I mean,
people saw him as rock and roll. I mean, Dave Britton, who divided people into rock and roll and non-rock and roll. I mean, Salman Rushdie was non-rock and roll. Martin Amis was non-rock and roll. But oh God, who wrote Into the Woods? The musical. Oh God.
Christ.
Famous American, great American. Sondheim was rock and roll. I mean, even though but as far as
it was a musical
Dave Britton was concerned, it was that was it. Again, I've lost my thread. I don't know what's the matter with me today.
Well, it's the Ballard not listening to music thing.
Oh, that
kind of genuinely surprised me.
He was tone deaf. He didn't. He had no understanding of. That's partly why we if you like, drew apart to a degree, because, you know, he could not understand why I was performing on stage. You know, he couldn't see what it was. It had, was it the groupies? You know, was it the dope?
Yeah.
No.
The fact that it was the music didn't make any sense.
Well, you know, I mean, I was just, this happened to me from time to time. People would say, you know, do you want to come on stage with us? You know, and that's all it was. That's how it had started off, you know, with Hawkwind. And I was used to doing it, so it wasn't any big thing for me. But he just could not. And the thing that's really, really upset me for many, many years, and I must say this is a thing I'm jealous about, deeply jealous about, I have to say, probably so much so that I'd buried it. And that is that he went on Desert Island Discs, Jimmy did, being tone deaf, and I was, and Roy Plomley refused point blank on several occasions. The producer wanted me on Desert Island Discs.
Yeah.
Roy Plomley refused to have me on Desert Island Discs. I suspect because he thought the deep fix was to do with drugs.
Wow.
And that he didn't want a person associated with drugs appearing on the show, because pretty much everybody else that I knew was on Desert Island Discs. And I've always thought, you know, the one accolade you can have in England is to be on Desert Island Discs. I mean, otherwise, particularly when Roy Plumley was running it, it was the kind of sense that you'd really arrived. You know, if you're on Desert Island Discs, you were there.
So, Mike, before we go, because we're beginning to run out of time, what's your celebration?
Well, I finished the Wounds of Albion, the last book in the last novel in the Eternal Champion series. It is the last novel.
Yeah.
It produces a resonance which I'm very, very proud of myself for having produced. I just hope people realize how good it is, because, you know, I've often said that trying to get a book into particularly a non-linear book into you know, to resonate, to have a good resonating ending, you've got to make it work, and it has to work for the reader. You know, they can't just be left at the end thinking, oh well, that was that. You know, you've got to actually make it feel like there is a proper resonance there. Anyway, and I've done it. I've pulled it off. And I wasn't sure. Mate. I mean, I've been uncertain. I just finished reading it this morning. I wanted to finish it before we did this. I mean, I was by myself when it happened, and I thought, bloody hell. I mean, Lynn's all skeptical of this anyway, so she probably wouldn't have said anything. But I am very, 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 very proud of myself, mate, for having done it.
That is fantastic. I mean, I really, for a wide variety of reasons, I can't wait for it to come out, and I can't wait to read it.
You know, it takes autobiography, which the others have, fake autobiography, which the others have, and pure fantasy fiction, which the others have, and it brings it all together so that the Eternal Champion, the ending to the fantastic series of the Eternal Champion, as witnessed in many a Titan book, comic book, and book, in fact, come to think of it, plus my own life story. I'm just hoping I'm not going to die today. That's the only thing, because
I'm sure you're not.
I was afraid if I finished it, that would be the end. I'd just fall backwards. This happened to Jack Trevor's story. He typed the end of his last manuscript and actually died. He had a heart attack. But anyway, I just wasn't sure that it was possible to pull off, to bring the fantastic and the realistic together, to make a fully satisfying ending. and I'm pretty. But I mean, I'm sure I've done it. Nobody else may be, but I know I have. I mean, as I said to Linda, I don't care what anybody thinks. I know I have actually done it. And well, you know,
Oh, mate,
I'm very pleased.
I'm so pleased for you. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you.
And that is wonderful. And when we're on the approach road to publication, on one of our future conversations, let's wrap it around that.
Yeah,
So
okay.
we can get into it, and of course it will. But let's get into it in detail before the book comes.
Yeah,
and I'm so pleased for you, Mike.
It still has to be read. Linda
of
will
course.
read it. You know, it's got to be edited and all sorts of stuff. But I finished reading it myself, and whatever its flaws, it's I've, you know, at least I've pulled off what I wanted to pull off, and I'm still going to go on writing. I'm still going to write short stories and novellas and stuff. But I've basically finished, and I'll still write the odd Elric short story, you know, and stuff like that. But it's the real, actual, proper ending of the Eternal Champion, from, you know, from my point of view as the writer, and my point of view as the persona of, you know, the Eternal Champion. So,
mate, I really cannot wait for it. That's epic news. I'm going to wrap us up with where I should have begun, which I never did, which is the introduction. And this is welcome to Forbidden Planet TV. I'm Andrew Sumner. And this, of course, is the one and only, the great Michael Moorcock. And we have been talking about his involvement in the Ballard book collection anthology, Reports from the Deep End, and Titan Comics' two glorious Moorcock's Multiverse editions, all available now. And we've after talking about many other subjects, we've wrapped up on the epic news that Mike's actually completed The Wounds of Albion, which I guess will be out next year sometime, right, Mike?
I hope so. Yeah, I mean, it's. I'm sure I probably won't be delivering it till the end of this year, so it will probably be sometime next year.
Please give my love to Linda. Tell her I said thank you so much for setting this up. My dad, by the way, says a big hello from Liverpool.
Good. Yeah, how's he doing? I
mean, he's in fantastic shape.
He's good.
Fantastic shape, and he's just about to turn 92, and he's in great shape.
Well,
and sends all his best, Mike.
Yeah, Linda's going to be 81, I think, and they'll both be watching the same game. I think that at least it comes on at 4 here. I don't know what time.
Defo watching the footy.
Yeah.
There can be no doubt, Mike. I'll let's get together again the other side of San Diego.
Yeah, great.
Side of Comic-Con. Wonderful to see you, mate. Wonderful to see you looking so well.
Yeah, and give my best to Walter as well. If you know, when you see him.
When I see him, I absolutely will.
Okay, all right.
You take care, Mike. Andy. Great to see you, mate. See you soon.
Bye, mate.
If you're enjoying watching Forbidden Planet TV and you're enjoying watching us talk to the world's most interesting and accomplished filmmakers, authors, artists, musicians, creators, subscribe right here. See you soon.